All right, everyone, we're going to get started. This is the He-Man's New Adventures in the Toy Aisle panel. As a reminder, no videotaping, please. PowerCon is videotaping all of the panels, and they will be online at a later date, but feel free to take pictures.
Now it's your turn. Give it up, Skeletor. I've got He-Man, the most powerful man in the universe. Come on, He-Man. Let's go. You got him, He-Man. You're a hero.
You can be a hero.
With He-Man.
Buy He-Man in specially marked packages and get a mutant-free. Figures and vehicles sold separately.
All right, I'm Jon Kallis, and today's panel will have Mark DiCamillo. He was the male action design manager at Mattel during the New Adventures of He-Man and was also a former director of marketing for Mattel. We have Errol McCarthy, who illustrated the New Adventures of He-Man toy mini-comics, and he also formerly worked on the toy and card art for the original Masters of the Universe toy line. And we have Mark Taylor, who returned to Mattel as a senior vice president during the New Adventures of He-Man, and of course, he designed the original He-Man. As always, please hold your questions till the end. We'll let everyone line up if they have any questions for anyone on the panel near the end of the presentation. So I wanted to start off with Mark and have him talk about the live-action He-Man series that began development at Mattel that eventually evolved into the New Adventures of He-Man.
Sure. So everyone knows the movie with Dolph Lundgren came out in 1987, and after the movie, there was a lot of talk with inside Mattel Entertainment, our entertainment group, about possibly doing a live-action, weekly TV show. And so there was a lot of concepts that were thrown around about doing that, and my design team was tasked with trying to come up with toys that would work in that particular environment. Obviously, that environment, if you're back in 1987, you're looking at trying to do characters that it doesn't cost a lot to do with makeup. There wasn't a lot of CGI available back then, no computer graphics, certainly not in weekly television shows. So to be able to create characters that humans could be with some just general costumes was one of the key elements of the line. And then also all the vehicles had to be vehicles that we could, you could make that would work on a real street. So like modified motorcycles and cars, trucks, etc. Were all kind of how we designed the toy line. And we did a lot of concept sketches, a lot of concept designs to kind of bring in this kind of live action, male action look to a potential toy line. And this was basically 1987 through the beginning of 1988.
So after that, how did you evolve into the New Adventures of He-Man?
So the New Adventures of He-Man came around, and it was driven a large part by International. So Mattel International was still having some success with the Masters toy line, but they had some friction in the market, primarily the fact that the Masters toy line, the toys are really big. European homes are much smaller than American homes, and so they were really putting a lot of pressure on to make the toys themselves actually smaller so that the play sets would be smaller and it'd be easier to fit in European homes. That was driven by Lindsay Williams, who was the president of Mattel International at the time. And so we had a lot of, again, design talk about how do we do that. And they also wanted to have a more futuristic space theme. There's a lot of, space shows and stuff like that going on at the time. And so they wanted to try to modernize it. So we kind of put our heads together, my design group, and came up with some kind of more future-oriented ideas around He-Man and the Masters of the Universe. And eventually that evolved into the New Adventures line. So that map that you had earlier of the triax star system, that was drawn by Dave Wolfram, who was one of the designers on the line. And myself and Dave kind of put together this story about these two planets that were, just one orbit apart. And of course, He-Man went to the one, Primus, and then Skeletor kind of followed on behind and went to Denebria. this other planet, and he lived on Nordor. So we had a lot of Tolkien, Lord of the Rings fan even back then in the 80s, and so some of that stuff crept into our story concept. So we kind of did a story treatment, and that eventually went over to Jetlag Productions that then launched on from that to actually design the actual TV show.
And then did you have any specific memories on any of the action figures, since a lot of them were new designs? You didn't really was it a conscious decision not to bring back characters from the original Masters of the Universe line?
Yeah, it was definitely a clean cut. It's a pretty interesting story. Maybe I'll bore you with some of the details. So we went, myself, Jill Barad, who was, I think, head of design and marketing at the time at Mattel, and then George Volanakis, who was the VP of Boys marketing at the time. We went to Tokyo for an inventor sweep. You may not know that, but a lot of toy concepts and ideas in the toy industry come from outside inventors. You know, our design and development group creates most of it and a lot of it, but we also reach outside for some fresh ideas. And this one design company called Sente in Tokyo had a number of ideas for figures. So in the New Adventures of He-Man toy line, things like Flip Shot and the Bolo Jet that shot the balls out and tied people up, those are all toy concepts that actually came from Sente in Tokyo. And while we were there, they showed us these concepts, and we started to work with those to kind of mold them into a new line, again, the New Adventures of He-Man's line. Just one side story there. So it was the three of us, George Volanakis, Jill Barad, and myself, on this inventor sweep. And we had been at Sente. We went to a number of other toy companies as well, including Tomy Toys. And we were there at Tomy. They were presenting some toy lines for Mattel to potentially bring in and import into the United States. They had several groups of design teams come through and present to us. And the last group that came in, they didn't have time to do introductions. So because they were running late, so the first group left, the next group came in. And so they started presenting. Now, Japan back in the 80s was a very chauvinistic kind of place. And so since no introductions were done, they started presenting to the two men in the room, which was myself and George Volanakis. And Jill Barad, who is the most senior person from Mattel, they just completely ignored. So they just focused all their attention on George and I. Well, George thought he picked up on this, and he kind of noticed it and then started to play with it. So he took his notepad that was in front of him and he slid it in front of Jill and kind of pointed to it like she should take some notes. And that didn't sit well. If anyone ever knew Jill Barad, that didn't sit well with Jill. So she gets up, stops the entire meeting, and starts handing out business cards. And of course, when the people from Tomy that were presenting saw the business card and saw that she was the most senior person at the table, they were all mortified. And so the meeting degenerated quickly after that. And by the way, shortly after that, George Volanakis found himself working at Earl Toys doing tractors in Iowa. So Mattel could be a rough place at times.
Now, Mark, you came back after working on the original Masters of the Universe.
I designed the original, yes.
And then you came back while the New Adventures of He-Man were kind of in full swing. So what was that like for you?
Well, he's done a great job presenting, actually, but I wasn't there at that time. I walked out in '81, and I'd worked on He-Man from the time I was about 10 years old. And so when I left, they kind of, everybody got into it from a different point of view. And I just wanted to be gone. And because I'd done what I wanted to do. 1979, I showed it to him. 1980, I worked my can off. And 1981, I left. I came back, about 1988, and it was pretty dead. I mean, Mark has laid it out real well. They were bringing in whatever they could from anywhere they could, but it wasn't clicking. When He-Man was presented to kids in a child test, I was lucky to be at the first one. Were you there? Were you at the one DiCamillo set up? Okay, Mark Ellis was another nice marketing guy. These were the nicest marketing guys in all of Mattel. And I say that sincerely. They were always very open and patient with me, which is really saying something. And we had this child test, and you probably heard the story. She actually had gotten some kids around 5 to 8 years old from another test that they weren't ready for. They didn't have product for. So we went in there and we showed prototypes. Some of them I literally was still painting at my desk when we went in there, because what a great opportunity. Nobody knew if anything like this would work. I mean, Mattel is a Barbie outfit. That's what they do. That's what they've always done since Ruth Handler was there. They do Barbie. And even when they did He-Man, they did him kind of like Barbie, really. But when we took it into the child test, the upshot of it was the first group tried to steal the toys. They literally put them in their little bomber jackets, put them in their knapsacks, rolled them up in towels, whatever they could to try to get them out of there. And I knew then that we had a big hit, and I could hardly wait to get back and tell my friends, the sculptor Tony Guerrero, probably the best sculptor I've ever seen, and model maker Ted Mayer, who was working with me on the vehicles at that time, because we had to flush out the line. In other words, you couldn't have just a bunch of figures. Could, but it wouldn't go very far. You had to have some price points, and the vehicles were natural for that. And then I sculpted the Castle Grayskull, and that was the big price ticket. The funny part of it is, Castle Grayskull, the target price they gave me was $19 and change. Toys R Us sold it for $50, had people waiting in line, and they took the markup. So it gives you an idea. Kids were crazy about this, and I was glad to be a part of it. And I was glad to see it do so well, because without Mattel, I couldn't have done it. And without me, Mattel couldn't have done it. Sounds conceited, but that's a fact. And then other people took it on from there. And they did some great stuff. I watched from the sidelines. I was working for Tomy at that time. I went to work for Tomy, very good Japanese company. Then after that, I went to Playmates and did the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
Now, Earl,
Yes.
you got to work also on the original He-Man line, and then you came into New Adventures, you did mini comics, and you did some toy concept art. So how did you approach the New Adventures of He-Man differently, given you were already so familiar with the original property?
Well, I had been doing freelance for this whole thing since about 1980, I think. That's correct. And it was just a matter of shifting gears and doing, Mark would give me a rough sketch, or somebody would, and I'd finish it off. It was a lot of fun. I could hardly believe they were paying me to do it. I should have been paying them, right?
It's always interesting when it's not a job for you.
Yeah, it's true. It's actually true.
Excuse me, Errol.
Yeah.
He was natural, because he uses the gesture style that was great, because we were trying to get, obviously, a lot of movement, and Errol's a natural. His style was perfect, and he could take it and run with it, come out pretty darn good.
Yeah, it was just a lot of fun.
Now, one of the most popular toys in the line was the role-play toys, such as the electronic Power Sword. So I thought we'd talk about that real quick.
The new He-Man Power Sword.
Cool! It makes sounds! Skeletor!
The Power Sword makes 8 action sounds. It lights up with power. You can be a hero with the He-Man Power Sword. And you can be a hero with Flip Shot, Frog, and the mighty Bowler Jet. All toys sold separately from He-Man.
So there were a lot of different role-playing toys, the Power Sword, the Skull Staff. Could you talk a little about those and how actually popular they were in the line?
Sure.
So the He-Man's Power Sword, also the germ of the idea came during that inventor sweep in Tokyo, and Sente, the one that came up with Flip Shot and the Bolo Jet and Slog, some of those actions for the characters, They showed me a glove that was a karate glove that made karate sounds. So like when you moved it, it would make a punching sound or it would make a chopping sound and stuff like that. They showed that to me and Jill on that trip. And then that night I went back to my hotel room and I said, well, the glove's kind of cool, but He-Man's thing is his sword. So I went back into my room and I quickly sketched up, what that would look like as a sword and what sounds it should make for motion control, et cetera. And took that back to them the next day. And they then quickly built a prototype over the next couple of days and then brought that back. And that ultimately became the Power Sword, which actually ended up being certainly the bright star from a toy perspective and the New Adventures line. Sold well over $30 million worldwide. So back in that day, in marketing, we had a target. You had to have $20 million in sales in the first year for a toy line in order to survive to become a second-year toy line. And so the He-Man Power Sword alone basically kept the New Adventures of He-Man toy line going. And continued investment in it going forward into the cartoon show the following year, et cetera. So we kind of created this whole new element. Up until that point, the old Masters of the Universe toy line, the original line, all of the child-size accessories were just basically licensed to third-party toy companies that just made costumes for Halloween, made like gloves or a shield or what have you. So it was all licensed product. They weren't actually manufactured by Mattel. So it wasn't until when I came up with the Power Sword and we kind of created this whole new toy line of, accessories for that were child-sized that kids could really role play themselves. They could be He-Man or Skeletor. That we took that to a whole new level. The commercial you saw there for the Power Sword was done by Rich Fukutake. He was the original marketing manager for the launch of the New Adventures of He-Man. And then when I had been on Hot Wheels for that period of time in marketing, and then I moved over and took over New Adventures in '91. And that's when we did the Skull Staff as a companion toy. And we had a companion commercial that was very similar, it used the same techniques. And that toy was also very successful. So.
That's very interesting that one toy can kind of carry the line for several years like that.
Yeah, at the end of the day, it's a business. Unfortunately, certainly it was a toy company. As much as we love the work that we do, Earl should have been paying us, but people have to buy the toys in order for us to keep going.
Well, and in the atmosphere at Mattel at the time then, was the New Adventures of He-Man considered at least a small success, if not?
Yeah, it was certainly a small success. It did well internationally initially, and that was where it was targeted. Another story about that, so when we came back with these action figures and the actions for the figures like Flog or Flip Shot and some of those, the mechanisms to make that work in the toy were very intricate. And there was a summit that was held at an offsite where John Ammerman, who was the chairman and CEO of Mattel at the time, was there. Jill Barad representing the US and Lindsay Williams representing international. And then I got a call, come to this hotel where they were in Manhattan Beach, and then bring the toys with me, bring the samples with me. So I brought the samples with me, and Lindsay was still very much, we want to make these things small. They have to fit in a European, kid's room or living room. So they can't really be big. And Jill, on the other hand, was saying, no, for TV commercials, they really have to have demonstrable features. They have to really come to life. If it's just this little figurine, it's not really going to be advertisable. And so we kind of went back and forth, and ultimately, kind of the King Solomon moment was when John Ammerman said, well, fine, can you kind of push them both together, make the action figures, but then also make them smaller so they fit in European homes? And we said, okay, well, that's what we're going to do. I brought that back. The engineering team hated me, said, are you crazy? This has to be a Swiss watch now. But that's kind of where the emphasis in the line came from, is to bring those actions actually into the toys at a very small scale. Certainly a small scale for a male action figure that did something.
And then a lot of the characters, the names, you did use, I mean, obviously He-Man and Skeletor returned. You had Starship Eternia, which was a terminology from the previous line. But was it a conscious decision that everything needed to basically be something new and not tied to the old property?
Yeah, we just tried to bring forward just kind of the main characters, Man-at-Arms. We did some sketches for that as well, but most of the secondary characters in the original Masters line just kind of got left behind in Eternia, and it was really just Skeletor and He-Man that came forward into the new adventures and created a bunch of new characters. Partly because we didn't want to have a lot of confusion between the two. It was kind of like He-Man and Skeletor were lifted out of the old world, the barbarian world of Masters, and then into this kind of futuristic space world. And so we weren't kind of bringing the whole cast, just bringing the two main combatants. Kind of like they kind of went through a time portal into this whole new world, and then the battle began in there.
When you mentioned too, a lot of the New Adventures toy commercials are fantastic, like the Power Sword and the Skull Staff. Was it always a conscious decision at Mattel that this type of toy line would also always be promoted by a cartoon series?
Yeah, Mattel, basically Masters of the Universe was the grandfather of toy-based television entertainment. They were the ones that started it all. And then after that came Captain Power. After that came Brave Star. And then it just kind of moved on from there. Across the toy industry, Transformers had a show. G.I. Joe then had a show. Everyone had to have a show. And the main reason is that when you're playing with a male action figure, you want a story. You're playing with the figurines and you're kind of reenacting the story of the battle that's going on between them. You want a jumping off place for the child to say, this is kind of the story and the personalities of these characters, and that's why they're fighting. And being able to do that in a television show or a movie is a great way to kind of bring those characters to life on a broader scale so that the kids can really reenact what they saw on TV and then take the story forward. Years ago, obviously before television, that was done through comic books. And in the original Masters of the Universe line, every toy came with a comic book for that very reason, to kind of tell the story. What is it about Moss Man? Why does he exist? What does he do? What's his power? All that stuff. That was all in the comic book that came with the original toy. Once we had the cartoon show, they could see it live, 24/7. Eventually with cable and everything else, you could go watch the Power Hour, and it's always there, and you could see the story and react to the story and then take your figurines out. Obviously, Captain Power and Brave Star tried to take that even a step further because both of those television concepts actually interacted with the toy. So in Captain Power and in Brave Star, when fighting happened on the show, it actually affected your toy. Your toy would blow up or whatever.
And then the fact that you have such a massive marketing campaign, toy commercials, the cartoon series, and then perhaps the success of the old line, was it easier then for Mattel to kind of get the New Adventures line into stores from the beginning?
I always say the most expensive real estate in the world is the real estate that's right up here in a person's brain. It takes a lot of money to create a brand and have that brand stick. So anytime you have a really strong brand, you want to continually leverage it. Mattel, any place, any large consumer packaged goods company calls that an umbrella. You start with the main brand concept, and then you can have many sub-brands underneath that, but they all leverage that real estate that you bought in people's brains. And no better real estate, as Mark Taylor talked about, than the original He-Man and the Masters of the Universe. It was an iconic image, just very visceral that people just reacted to right out of the box. Just seeing the toy just sitting there, it just had an energy to it, and just being able to carry that forward. Part of that was lost in the New Adventures, and I lost that real visceral feel to kind of go to the space side. And I remember when Mark came back, he said, "What did you do to He-Man? You shrunk him down."
That's true. I would like to, it adds a little weight to it. Everything has to be in a context. And you have to remember that the things he said, they're true, but you have to understand the pressure. And the pressure was George Lucas had come to Mattel first, and he tried to pitch it to Mattel, and they walked on it. And because they said they couldn't do it in time, they wanted to make the next season. They couldn't do it in time, so they walked on it. Realize what that looked like when Star Wars came out? I mean, it was like every toy designer in the world looked at it and went, oh boy, would I like to do those. And I was always hoping, I probably failed, but I was always hoping that He-Man, which was all he was called at that time, would tell his own story. That's why I worked really hard on the cast. I wanted the kids to be able to get in front of a TV set, make the story up, create the story, be the story, and it would have a castle, it would have vehicles, it would have everything that would explain it and empower the kid. And Mark was always good at the marketing people, Mark Ellis, Mark DiCamillo, were always very good at putting up with me because I was always ranting, going on and on about, no, it doesn't need a little comic book. It doesn't need any TV. Well, it did, of course. But, you know, when you think you're the greatest in the world, that's what you do. And, but you have to understand the context of pressure. Like when Jill was, I wasn't there. But when Jill was buying these ideas from Sinte and the inventing community, the pressure was immense. How are you going to keep over $4 billion line running? How are you going to do that? And you know, it comes right down on the people that are guiding the ship, basically the marketing, the executive people. They have to make the right decision. The wrong decisions, I've seen lots of wrong decisions made. I could give you a list a mile long of people making wrong decisions. But in He-Man, it was so powerful with the kids. And that's what helped me get the thing started. But after a while, there was other context. There were other things in the environment that started eating away at it. And it was hard to keep it in the forefront, especially without a live action show. I mean, look at Star Wars. One of the, I don't know, one of the most appealing kids movies ever made, series. And you're hoping that they keep alive against it. And I have to say that I think perhaps at Mattel there were a lot of people that would just say, if we can just hold our own, that will be good. But as from my point of view, when I came back, Power Sword was just had peaked. It was on its way down. And to show you how bad it could be, we tried doing a Skeletor staff. I think that perhaps we sold 5 of them. I'm not sure. But it was the worst decision because Skeletor as this embodiment of evil, fighting this clean-cut, powerful guy that represented the kid, of course. And that was natural. When you put the staff and hand it to a kid and say, why don't you be Skeletor? And, you know, flip me off. You know, He-Man, the sword was a natural. And that was the last gasp. The sword was kind of, once you put, like we did for Turtles, we did child size, and we did bow staffs, nunchucks, all that stuff. And they always sold, but get this one, they sold for $10. You know, that's almost junk toy in this time and age. Excuse me, that's just going to mention.
Any final thoughts that you'd like to share on the new adventures before I open it up for questions? All right, does anyone have any questions? They can line up at the microphone. I know someone has a dying question.
It's so great to see all 3 of you up on the stage. I was really curious. I really enjoyed the cartoon for New Adventures. And I was wondering, how did that play into the toy line? And also, there are some characters that only appeared in the cartoon, like E-Slave and Sorceress and Tila. Was there any discussion of putting those characters into the toy line from the cartoon?
Yeah, absolutely. So, after we came up kind of with the general story treatment, created the world, we turned all that over to Mattel Entertainment and to Jetlag Production. And they did a, fantastic job. It's one thing to kind of create the character, as a plastic and as a drawing, and even to create a little bit of the story setting to say it's going to be in this, new solar system that has these two planets and kind of create that. But you have to create the character, what do they look like? How do they sound? What makes them tick? Do they not like snakes? Do they like spiders? All that stuff really has to come to make the characters come to life. And that's what Jetlag did. And they did it really well. They were a relatively new entertainment group up in Canada, and they produced the whole show and a lot of great stories around it. And, they would come up with characters. Obviously, they had our Bible. Here's all the characters that need to be in it because we already have toys for these. But then, they certainly had creative freedom to create their own characters because they want to make a much richer world, have more different conflicts, different tension between different characters. And a lot of them, were on the drawing board for us to make toys out of them. It was just a question of, could we get it into the line? What feature would it have? How long would it take to produce, et cetera. So some of them were still on the drawing board when, the line started to shrink too much and just never saw the light of day.
Do you know how you, for example, this is back in the early days, before there was any TV, before there was any comic books. There just wasn't anything. It's the only boys' toy line that launched successfully without any license whatsoever. Nothing supporting it. And it's the only one that's ever made it. And I'm real proud of that. But these guys also worked on it. They worked on it in the early stages also. But the way you do something is like, I remember telling my friend Ted, we have to do a vehicle that's about this size, and it's got to come in at a price point. And I said, and the big thing is, it has to feature He-Man. Because if He-Man sits in it, you got to be able to see him so you can't have a cockpit and stuff. He's got to be He-Man. Because He-Man, when he started, was a figure-driven line, as versus, say, Star Wars, which even though they had very powerful figures, but it was an accessory-driven line. We used to divide things that way, from a design point of view. If you were going to sell figures, you had to make sure the figures showed. And we tried to do that. And you can see in the line, when they started changing their take on it, and they didn't think it was that important anymore to show He-Man. You had to show him. And if Skeletor was the protagonist, you had to get Skeletor so you could see him too. Because let's face it, you don't forget Skeletor or He-Man.
Thank you so much for your question. Next.
Hello. When you guys are designing new characters, do you find that there are any surefire characteristics or visual design elements that this is going to be the kids really like this color scheme or the knife in the boot?
You try to avoid that. But one thing that's always helped me, I'm a big fan of Joseph Campbell. He's the expert on myth. And he was the person that George Lucas consulted with to do Star Wars 1. In fact, he gives Joseph Campbell the credit that he would have never finished the manuscript if it wouldn't have been for Joseph Campbell. And if you listen to some of the old tapes of him and being interviewed, it gives you a general feel. For example, if you pick a color, if you say kids all like red, white, and blue, that's true, but it's how you use them, and if you use them in a certain way, it can even make a bad guy. So you just gotta work on it. Like Ted and I went over those vehicles again and again until we could get them at the right price point. Really tough to get those things at the right price point.
And I think, to amplify what Mike was saying, you have to understand that in any large company, whether it's Disney or Mattel, Pixar, it's a very collaborative process as far as how the designs evolve. And, designers will come up with hundreds of sketches. You'll have a character or a vehicle or something like that, and the wall will be covered with sketches of it. and multiple people might be working on it, and we all get together and say, well, we like this part about this one, and this thing looks really good, and gosh, what if this all, and then someone goes back and quickly sketches and says, oh yeah, let's put those two things together, and that looks even better. And so it's a very, evolving process. It's kind of like Darwinian in that respect, in that, we have all these bits and pieces and we are gluing them all together as the characters start to come to life. So it's a very collaborative, very evolutionary kind of process, this design and creative process that has lots of iterations. And there's lots of bad DNA characteristics that end up in the wastebasket. It's kind of natural selection. No, that's horrible. Ends up on the floor. And then ultimately, once the design team has done that, then marketing comes in and we show it to them and they say, well, this looks good, or this can sell, or this can't sell. And then a whole nother round of that happens. And so it takes a while for all this stuff to percolate out. And then you finally get to a character and you show it to a kid. And when, as Mark said, the original characters from MOU, people just looked at it and said, whoa. Kids just gravitate to it, and then you're there. So it takes that.
It's very humbling for me to think that in this room, there could be some of those kids I watched at the child test. And, it takes me down a little bit. Probably your kids I may go to a child test. I believed in child tests a lot for what you can take, and that's the pure hunger, the animal appeal, that when they see something they want, I want that. And I saw that at that child test when the marketing facilitator pulled the cloth off our product, and those kids got the first look at the prototypes. They went nuts. They did everything I dreamed they would do. They took the toys, He-Man, Skeletor, and did exactly what everybody does. Boom, boom, parts are flying, weapons are flying. They're ruining prototypes that are worth a fortune, and we couldn't stop them. And then you've got it. Then I don't care if it's a movie, anything. It's that first reaction, and then it's trying not to ruin that, and trying to support it, and that gets very complicated. Then people like Mark and marketing people, they have to give the thing long-term legs. Very difficult to do, because you may knock yourself off. You may do something that's like he was saying, that may be something that looks very similar to something you've already done. And you don't get many chances on the shelf. If you go out there with something that's a real clinker, you're not going to recover very soon.
And I was going to say, Masters, by the way, He-Man and Masters was really one of the first toy lines where the characters themselves really had character. Up until then, boys figure play, was Green Army Men. So you had the Green Army Men versus the Gray Army Men. But they were just molded plastic figures. There was no, besides the weapon that they carried, there was really nothing that distinguished them. Cowboys and Indians, same thing. Mattel did Major Matt Mason, a space line. Again, it was just Major Matt Mason, and he had different little vehicles. But there wasn't. You wouldn't look at a character, just how it was designed, sculpted, painted, what it looked like, and go, wow, there's a story behind this thing that I'm looking at, because this thing visually tells a story, by what he looks like. Skeletor clearly looks evil. It's not that his color was gray and this other guy was green. He really looks evil. He-Man really looks powerful and strong and clean cut, and but with a very visceral sense of power. That was in the actual characters, in their visualizations. And up until that point, that didn't really exist. And Masters really, kind of was a trailblazer in doing that. And then after that, obviously, more and more toy lines and story lines, started to go down that route. But up until that point, definitely not. And that's why the entertainment was important, because the characters had more character, and so you wanted to know more about them. You wanted to know what made them tick. And do they like chocolate milkshakes, or do they like vanilla milkshakes? There was something about them. And that made kids care about them, because now they're more real. They're somebody that you can connect to, versus, well, I've got my 18 Green Army Men and we're going to storm this hill in the backyard, like throwing dirt at them to see which ones die. This you cared about the characters because of who they were.
Excellent question. Thank you. And we have time for one last question. Hi, guys.
Hi.
So almost 40 years in now on this property, it's been reinvented a few times now. You know, you had the original go around, and you guys doing it, and then they tackled it again in 2002, and there's been all the various kind of more niche-y fan-based interpretations since. But you guys had the enviable, or maybe unenviable position, depending on how you look at it, being the first people who had to say, we're going to reinterpret this thing. Like, you were the first guys to do that. If you were to be tasked with that today, in 2019, with, you know, because obviously you see, I don't know if you've seen them yet, but Mattel has their newer take on the line that they're doing,
Sure.
which is, they went obviously a very traditional classic, they went back to the day one with it. How do you guys feel about that? And what's your take on that? And if you were to be tasked with, let's reinvent Masters of the Universe for 2019, how would you guys want to tackle that? Where would you take it today?
Well, given that I was tasked with that quite a few years ago, today I would probably go back to the essence of the line. So there was a lot that happened, a lot of external drivers from a marketing perspective that kind of cast the new adventures. They had to be smaller, they had to have a more futuristic theme. So there's a lot of external marketing drivers. I think most of those drivers would not be there today. I think today, because of all of the, you know, superhero movies and everything else that are out there, you know, from Marvel and from DC, you know, I think kids are into characters now. So if anything, what I would be doing with the line is making sure that the characters themselves really come to life. That there's huge backstories about everyone. What's their strength? What's their weakness? Why are they in this conflict? The same thing that Pixar does with all of their movies. You know, what's going on between Woody and Buzz? All of that stuff, that's what the kids really want. They want to really relate to the characters today. And I would really focus on how do we bring that forward, and then how do we capture that in an exciting way in the toys themselves so they can play out those conflicts. And that would probably use some technology, you know, whether that's, you know, electronics in the characters, whatever, we would, you know, look at some ways to kind of bring that to life in a new way, and to keep that story going. But that's what I would be doing. I would be, how can I bring the characters to life? How can I make them even more real than they were?
Right next to that is another really important thing. And actually, the people that know this better than anybody are the girls' side, the girls' dolls. And that you want to get the child to customize the product, to make it theirs. In other words, become very personal with it. I'm certainly out of it right now, but it's a time that there's a great opportunity for cottage industry in this country with the rapid prototypers we have and stuff. What if somehow, I don't, you know, I'd have to go back and start all over again, but you basically would kind of have something to do with the manufacturing of it, because we've given the manufacturing away to China.
That's a great idea.
Sorry?
We should do that.
You're hired.
Yeah, yo ho ho. Yeah, it's true. You got to make it so the child has a certain commitment to it. And you know, with probably one of the best ones was the Cabbage Patch Dolls. Watching how they did that and making it to where the little girls felt that was their Cabbage Patch, and it had a personality that they had something to do with. Of course, they didn't, but they had the myth. And I think in boys' toys, there's room for that. To build a hero and to make that part of you, I don't know, it's always been my thrill. So I think there's room for it. And with rapid prototyping, my gosh, what do we need China for? I mean, they do good work and they've got a lot of experience and they cut back on tooling and all kinds of things like that. But is it worth the trade-off? Where that a lot of our product is very non-creative and kind of also rants.
Yeah, that would be really fun. Mattel, you know, when they, in the mid-60s, they were into craft building. They had Vacuform was an incredible toy where you know, kids could basically create their own toys. And then obviously Thing Maker and Incredible Edibles. And to be able to do that with some of the new maker technology so that you can then say, just like we do, take all the various pieces of this look and this torso versus this skinny guy versus this long guy, and I can create my own characters. That's a great idea, Mark. I think that, that would be a way to really get the kids involved in the story. I'm making my own characters, and I can create the story around them and what their power is and how they use it and what they look like. Yeah, that's a great idea.
Yeah.
Is anyone from Mattel in here? Current Mattel? Because, we'll license that to you.
Well, another excellent question. Thank you. Thanks, guys. Well, that concludes He-Man's New Adventures in the Toy Aisle. Let's give these guys a big round of applause.